Hi, my project is on Saladin, the Emir of Syria. I know this project is supposed to be 3 to 4 minutes long, so I will try to keep it short, but there's a lot of information we need to go through. So let's get started. Saladin was the founder of the Ayyubid dynasty, which was in Syria and Egypt, and later encompassed most of what we now call the Middle East or Levant. I think that's what it's called. And he is widely regarded as one of the most famous Muslims of all time in European circles. And why is kind of the point of this presentation. Why is Saladin so famous in European literary circles? Is it because of his battlefield tactics, his devotion to Islam, or something else? So a little bit of background first. I don't know if you can see this. It doesn't really show up well here, but these are two compare and contrast maps, I suppose you could say. Here we have the Levant, the Orient, I guess you could call it. In 1135, 3 years before Saladin was born. They have the 5 Christian kingdoms that have been carved out from the Seljuk Empire, the Fatimids of Egypt, and the Sultanate of Rum up top, and then the Great Seljuk Empire. Saladin was born in 1138 in northern Iraq to a Kurdish family, and he would go on to the second post right here. He would go on to conquer nearly all of these. Saladin was a really devout Muslim, and he had what he called a jihad in his life, which essentially means struggle. And Saladin's jihad was to unify the Islamic states. He recognized that they were weaker for all the infighting that had happened in the centuries after the Prophet's death and the expansion of Islam so rapidly. And this infighting was a weakness that caused the Christian king, a small number of Christian knights, to be able to invade and carve out these 5 kingdoms. So he was successful in this jihad, and the jihad that Saladin fought was one of the reasons why he is looked to as an idealist, as an ideal jihadist today for a lot of young Muslims. But the reason that Saladin is so famous is not for his capture of Jerusalem back from the invaders. It is for his defense of the region in the Third Crusade. The Third Crusade is the most popular and probably the most famous of the 7, and it's mainly because of who was involved, namely Richard the Lionheart, who we see here is with Saladin. Richard was one of the only commanders that Saladin faced that he respected greatly, and Richard in turn respected Saladin. And the reason, we can get sort of into the reason that Saladin is quite so famous in European literary circles, is because at the time a really important virtue for the Crusaders to have was chivalry, which basically meant like being a good person, living a life full of virtue, stuff like that. And Saladin's Islamic beliefs led him to have a chivalrous life. And for that reason, when people met Saladin, when Richard never met him, but he and Saladin sent letters to each other and came very close to meeting a number of times, and they gained great respect for him. And because of this, when the Crusaders returned home, they spoke of Saladin, leading him to be written about in the future centuries. So as a Muslim, he fought a jihad, which is important. He made many donations to Islamic schools. Building schools, education was a huge part of Saladin's life as a ruler, and he is famous for having died almost penniless because he gave away so much of his money to those poorer than him in his own kingdom. He is pretty much the epitome of the perfect Muslim. So in European culture, Saladin in European culture is really important. He was written about in a lot of different books, and I've written some of them down. The Divine Comedy by Dante, which is one of the most influential works of the Renaissance. The Decameron, I'm forgetting the author, but he's an Italian dude. Also very important, and Saladin is mentioned by name. Voltaire writes about him in the play Zaire. And it's a reoccurring theme. Saladin was mostly forgotten in literary circles in the Arabian world about a century after his death, but his fame endured well into the 21st century. I mean, he's still very famous today and very written about in the European world. It's only in the last 100 or so years, as more and more Muslims have taken to like independence and revolutions, that Saladin has come out and has been championed as the ideal jihadist, if you know what I mean. But Saladin is very famous in European literary circles, and that's why he is widely regarded as the most famous Muslim of all time. In Dante's circle, he's ranked even high. He's, of course, in Dante's Divine Comedy, all the characters are in hell, but Saladin is in a higher level of hell, meaning a better level of hell than Muhammad himself, right? So that's kind of his place in history as well. I guess that's it. So Saladin, one of the most famous Muslims in history, for good reason. Very much written about, devout Muslim, very good man.